Alright, the incredible vision of Saint Drythelm. Just so I can separate it for different videos, so if people want to reference it from the very beginning, it's easier for everybody. This text is from the 8th century Anglo-Saxon monk and scholar Bede from his Ecclesiastical History of the English People. The vision of Drythelm is far more developed as a journey and gives a fuller account of otherworld topography, even foreshadowing the purgatorial landscapes of the 12th and 13th centuries. It therefore serves well as an introduction to the medieval form of the otherworld vision. Drythelm was a monk associated with the monastery of Melrose. At this time, a memorable miracle, and like to those of former days, was brought in Britain, for to the end that the living might be saved from death of the soul, a certain person, who had been some time dead, rose again to life and related many remarkable things he had seen, some of which I have thought fit here briefly to take notice of. Therefore was a master of a family in the district of Northumbrians, which is called Cunningham, who led a religious life, as did also all that belonged to him. This man fell sick, and his distemper daily increasing, being brought to extremity, he died in the beginning of the night. But in the morning early he suddenly came to life again, and sat up, upon which all of those that sat about the body weeping fled away in the great fright. Only his wife, who loved him best, though in a great consternation and trembling, remained with him. He, comforting her, said, "Fear not, for I am now truly risen from death, and permitting again to live among men. However, I am not to live the hereafter as I was wont, but from henceforth after a very different manner." Then rising immediately, he repaired to the oratory of the little town, and continuing in prayer till day, immediately divided all his sustenance into 3 parts, one whereof he gave to his wife, another to his children, and the third belonging to himself he instantly distributed among the poor. Not long after, he repaired to the monastery of Melrose, which is almost enclosed by the winding of the river Tweed, and having been shaven, went into a private dwelling which the abbot had provided, where he continued till the day of his death, in such extraordinary contrition of mind and body that, though his tongue had been silent, his life declared that he had seen many things either to be dreaded or coveted, which others knew nothing of. Thus he related what he had seen. He that led me had a shining countenance and a bright garment, and we went on silently, as I thought. Toward the northeast, walking on, we came to a vale of great breadth and depth, but of infinite length, and on the left it appeared full of dreadful flames. The other side was no less horrid, for violent hail and cold snow, flying in all directions. Both places were full of men's souls. Really quick, the only reason I am reading this, the only reason, is because as you look, Tundale is the next one after this. This is the chapter before, and the previous video was the one before that. I'm trying to show that all of these men from different centuries, and even the people seeing these things now when they die and come back to life, and even the people that have dreamed of hell or had visions of hell, it's all the same. All of it is the same. That is impossible if it's not true. And each one of them is brought by a person in shining robes. Every single one of them. And the way that they speak of these people is the same. They all have the same, like, speech patterns even. The angels always speak the same. And I just wanted to show this. I'm not trying to show you the way that they talked back then, or how they talked about purgatory or all that stuff, because those things were like sociological things at the time. Like, that's what was accepted. That's what the way that they practiced. You know, they're like, I'm a Christian, but I don't go to do the same things as a Baptist or a Methodist or a Congregationalist or any of those things. So back then, they had one church. Basically, it was usually a monastery, a Catholic church, or whatever. But there were Christian people at this time. It's not like now, you know, where people do certain things. Like back then, they had certain traditions. We have certain traditions today. I don't celebrate Christmas. My parents do. They're Christians. They celebrate Christmas. Like, they say, well, oh, God knows my heart. I think God does know your heart. But if you have we have the knowledge, we have the internet now, you can go look up the fact that Christmas is not a good thing. It's a pagan holiday. So this is strictly to show you that the stories are the same. So that if you're listening to my video and you're listening to me read this, and you don't believe in God, you might at least look at this structurally as words and see that all of these people had the same vision. It's all the same. Now, whereas an innumerable multitude of deformed spirits were thus alternately tormented far and near, as far as could be seen without any intermission, I began to think that this perhaps might be hell, of whose intolerable flames I had often heard talk. My guide, who went before me, answered to my thoughts, saying, "Do not believe so, for this is not the hell you imagine." When he had conducted me, much frightened with that horrid spectacle, by degrees to the farther end, on a sudden I saw the place begin to grow dusk and filled with darkness. When I came into it, the darkness by degrees grew so thick that I could see nothing besides it, and the shape and garment of him that led me. As we went on through the shades of night, on a sudden there appeared before us frequent globes of black flames, rising as it were out of the great pit and falling back again into the same. When I had been conducted thither, my leader suddenly vanished and left me alone in the midst of the darkness in this horrid vision, while those same globes of fire without intermission at one time flew up and at another fell back into the bottom of the abyss. And I observed that all the flames, as they ascended, were full of human souls, which, like sparks flying up with smoke, were sometimes thrown on high, and again, when the vapor of the fire ceased, dropped down into the depths below. Moreover, an insufferable stench came forth from the vapors and filled all those dark places. Having stood there a long time in much dread, not knowing what to do, which way to turn, or what end I might expect, on a sudden I heard behind me the noise of a most hideous and wretched lamentation, and at the same time a loud laughing, as a rude multitude insulting captured enemies. When that noise, growing plainer, came up to me, I observed a gang of evil spirits dragging and howling and lamenting souls of men into the midst of darkness, while they themselves laughed and rejoiced. Among those men I could see, as I could discern, there was one shown like a clergyman, a layman, and a woman. The evil spirits that dragged them went down into the midst of the burning pit, and as they went down deeper I could no longer distinguish between the lamentation of the men and the laughing of the devils, yet I still had a confused sound in my ears. In the meantime, some of the dark spirits ascended from the flaming abyss, and running forward beset me on all sides, and much perplexed me with their glaring eyes and stinking fire which proceeded from the mouths and nostrils, and threatened to lay hold on me with burning tongs, which they had in their hands, yet they durst not touch me, though they frightened me. Being thus on all sides enclosed with enemies in darkness, and looking about on every side for assistance, there appeared behind me on the way that I came, as it were, the brightness of the star shining amidst the darkness, which increased by degrees and came rapidly towards me. When it drew near, all those evil spirits that sought to carry me away with their tongues dispersed and fled. He whose approach put them to flight was the same that led me before, who, then turning towards the right, began to lead me, as it were, towards the southeast, and having soon brought me out of the darkness, conducted me into the atmosphere of clear light. While he thus led me in open light, I saw a vast wall before us, the length and height of which in every direction seemed to be altogether boundless. I began to wonder why we went to the wall, seeing no door, window, or path through it. When he came to the wall, we were presently, I know not by what means, on the top of it, and within it was a vast and delightful field, so full of fragrant flowers that the odor of its delightful sweetness immediately dispelled the stink of the dark furnace, which had pierced me through and through. So great was the light in this place that it seemed to exceed the brightness of day, or the sun in the meridian height. In this field were innumerable assemblies of men in white, and many companies seated together rejoicing. As he led me through the midst of those happy inhabitants, I began to think that this might perhaps be the kingdom of heaven, of which I had often heard so much about. He answered to my thought, saying, "This is not the kingdom of heaven as you imagine." When he had passed those mansions of blessed souls and gone further on, I discovered before me a much more beautiful light, and therein heard sweet voices of persons singing, and so wonderful a fragrance proceeded from the place that the other which I had been before thought most delicious then seemed to me but very indifferent, even as that extraordinary brightness of the flowery field compared with this appeared mean and inconsiderable. When I began to hope we should enter that delightful place, my guide on a sudden stood still, and then turning back led me back by the way we came. When we returned to those joyful mansions of the souls in the white, he said to me, "Do you know what all these things are which you have seen? I answered, I did not. And then he replied, That vale you saw, so dreadful for consuming flames and cutting cold, is the place in which the souls of those are tried and punished, who, delaying to confess and amend their crimes, at length have recourse to repentance at the point of death, and so depart this life. But nevertheless, because they, even at their death, confessed and repented, they shall all be received into the kingdom of heaven at the day of judgment. But many are relieved before the day of judgment by the prayers, alms, and fasting of the living, and more especially by masses. That fiery and stinking pit which you saw is the mouth of hell, at which whosoever falls shall never be delivered to all eternity. This flowery place in which you see these most beautiful young people so bright and merry is that into which the souls of those are received who depart the body in good works, but who are not so perfect as to deserve to be immediately admitted into the kingdom of heaven. Yet they shall all, at the day of judgment, see Christ and partake of the joys of this kingdom. For whoever are perfect in thought, word, and deed, as soon as they depart the body, immediately enter into the kingdom of heaven. In the neighborhood whereof that place is, where you heard the sound of sweet singing, with the fragrant odor and bright light. As for you, who are not to return to your body and live among men again, if you will endeavor nicely to examine your actions and direct your speech and behavior in righteousness and simplicity, you shall after death have a place or residence among these joyful troops of blessed souls. For when I left you for a while, it was to know how you were to be disposed of. When he had said this to me, I much abhorred returning to my body, being delighted with the sweetness and beauty of this place. I beheld him with the company of those I saw in it. However, I durst not ask him any questions, but in the meantime, on a sudden, I found myself alive among men. Now these and other things which this man of God saw, he would not relate to slothful persons and such as lived negligently, but only to those who, being terrified with the dreams dread of torment, or delighted with the hopes of heavenly joys, would make use of his words to advance in piety. Pause 1 second. And this is what the Lord says, don't cast your pearls before swine. If there's people that you know that are disgusting and like vile people, don't tell them the secrets of the kingdom of heaven. If you know they're only going to use it, like, for instance, Herod, he would listen to John the Baptist talk all the time. And then he took those same secrets that John was teaching and he used it and spoke it, but he didn't believe it. He was a fox. He was an evil man. Don't tell the secrets of the kingdom to those people. Let them go in their evil way. Tell them to people that you think are going to actually, give credence to what you're saying. And in the neighborhood of his cell lived on one Hemgils, a monk eminent in the priesthood, which he honored by his good works. He is still living and leading a solitary life in Ireland, supporting his declining age with coarse bread and cold water. He often went to that man, and asking several questions, heard of him all the particulars of what he had seen when separated from his body, by whose relation, which also came to the knowledge of those few particulars which we have briefly set down. He also related his visions to King Alfred, a man most learned in all respects, and was by him so willingly and attentively heard that at his request he was admitted into the monastery above mentioned and received the monastic tonsure. And he said, and the said king, when he happened to be in those parts, very often went to hear him. At that time, the religious and humble abbot and priest Ethelwald presided over the monastery, and now with worthy conduct possesses the episcopal see of the church of Lindisfarne. He had a more private place of residence assigned him in that monastery, where he might apply himself to the service of his Creator in continual prayer. And as that place lay on the bank of the river, he was wont often to go into the same to do penance in his body, and many times to dip quite under the water and to continue saying psalms or prayers in the same, as long as he could endure it, standing still sometimes up to the middle and sometimes to the neck in water. And when he went out from thence ashore, he never took off his cold and frozen garments till they grew warm and dry on his body. And when in the winter the half-broken pieces of ice were swimming about him, which he had himself broken to make room to stand or dip himself in the river, those who beheld it would say, "It is wonderful, brother Drythelm," for so he was called, "that you are able to endure such violent cold." He He simply answered, for he was a man of much simplicity and an indifferent wit, I have seen greater cold. And when they said, It is strange that you will endure such austerity, he replied, I have seen more austerity. Thus he continued through an indefatigable desire of heavenly bliss to subdue his aged body with daily fasting till the day he was being called away, and thus he forwarded the salvation of many by his words and example. And then the next is Tyndale. Now, in this, you probably heard them say masses, and it seems like they're talking about like confession and purgatory and things like that. And that's what I was trying to tell you, is that it was the way things were back then, but the stories are the same. The information in this is compatible with what people are having visions of right now, and also what people have had visions of before, and like not just this century, but like all past centuries, even until this, which is like 600, 700, 1100, 1200, all the way up, all of the Irish history. And I wanted you to pay attention to that end part. He would just sit in the water, and he wouldn't even dry himself off. He would just literally, in freezing cold water, walk out and just let himself air dry, which I don't know how it's possible without freezing to death, but he did it. And it's just like something to think about, is like to give daily sacrifice to the Lord. And I don't know how this is possible, but even non-Christian kids at my children's public school, they have said to my kids that Christmas means merry death of Christ. Which, why would Christ's Mass mean that? So obviously I don't approve of masses. I don't approve of Catholic masses. But as many times as I've read this, it does ring true with my spirit that these things are true, and that the angels did take these people to these places and to show them what hell and heaven were like. So, as I mentioned, going to load those two portions of the text, and then the Vision of Tyndale starts on page 18, and we are already on part 3, which is speaking of the heavenly realms. So I'll pick that portion up tomorrow. God bless you all, and have a good night.